We are here with Sruti Swaminathan, who is a senior attorney at the ACLU, and just this week presented a case before the Supreme Court, West Virginia versus BPJ. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We are so lucky to have our first ever impressive and important interview. No offense to Lucas Gage, but an impressive and important and an up-to-date interview today.
So we are here to talk about a case that is currently appearing before the Supreme Court. And I'm really excited to ask you, first of all, about this case. Can you give us a quick background on what exactly is happening?
Absolutely. So, we filed this case in 2021 in West Virginia. And at the time, West Virginia had passed a law called HB 3293. And what HB 3293 does is categorically bar transgender girls and women from participating in women's sports. And this is at all levels of competition. This is whether there's scholarships or prizes at issue or whether it's just intramural sports, bans all transgender girls from participation. And so, we needed to file a lawsuit because we had our client, Becky Pepper-Jackson. At the time this law was passed, she was 11 years old, right?
I was going to say, she comes from a family of runners, right? And so she just wants to participate in an activity that is something she loves and is part of her community, a way to make friends at school, and also her own family, and she can't participate in it.
Totally. And yeah, if I could tell you a bit about her, she's just like any other girl. She's a straight A student. I don't know if that's like every other girl.
I feel more girls.
Yeah, more girls. Yeah, she's a straight A student. She loves playing with her friends, being with her family. She has 3 dogs that she loves. And there's something unique about her. She's trans. She's known that her sex assigned at birth of male has not matched who she is since an extremely young age. And in 2019, she was diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And she's been living her life as the girl she is since then, right? She's never experienced her endogenous puberty. And for your audience, endogenous is sort of the puberty that's associated with her birth sex, because she's been on puberty delaying treatment since the start of her puberty. And then she continued in her treatment to taking hormone therapy, which allows her to go through a typically female puberty. And so this girl at the time, 11 years old, so excited for middle school sports, she just wants to try out for the cross country team, comes from a family of runners and is told, no, you and only you can't participate in sports. And just for a flag, that continues to be true today. Becky is the only transgender athlete to whom HB 3293 even applies.
And this was because in the state of West Virginia, she's like the only person who's it's been used against.
Yes.
So there's an entire law in the state of West Virginia for like one tween girl.
Yeah, it's not even that she's the only one it's used against. She's the only one who wants to play. She's the only transgender girl that the state has identified that even wants to participate. And
so this idea that she's taking so many opportunities away from the other girls.
Absolutely.
So the case being brought before the Supreme Court is to say that there cannot be this like trans discriminating rule in sports, that states cannot make these rules that are discriminating against transgender athletes.
I would love to tell you about that. So our case isn't even that broad. It's so narrow. This is a case applying to one individual athlete in West Virginia, Becky Pepper-Jackson. Any relief we sought only applies to her. It doesn't even talk about the constitutionality of other states' laws. And we've challenged it under 2 provisions. The 14th Amendment of the Equal Protection Clause, which, protects people's rights to be free from discrimination on the basis of sex. And then you have Title IX, which is the statute that prohibits discrimination in federally funded programs that Becky's school is subject to. And so, we raised claims under both statutes, and the lower courts agreed with us that this law was discriminatory as applied to Becky, as applied to a girl who has never experienced her endogenous puberty and who has gone through a typical female puberty. I think one big misconception is this law that we're challenging, the relief that we want is that all transgender girls should be able to play. In our hearts, that is what we want, but this lawsuit isn't asking for that.
Really quick, so this law also only applies to trans girls, not trans boys.
Not trans boys, because do they really care about girls if they're, deeming trans boys to be biological girls and trans girls to be biological boys? They don't mind when trans boys go on the boys' team and, potentially get hurt or anything. No, I think it really avails how, not about women's sports this actually is when you think about one athlete playing a non-contact sport, finishing in the back of the pack, so much so that she was told that she shouldn't even try out for
like the problem, like you're like not allowed to run against anybody, but if you were to, it'd be JV.
Right, exactly. Like she couldn't even make the track team for running. Her coaches told her to try shot put and discus because her running scores were too far behind to be competitive.
Okay, so this is my question. When you say that you won in the lower courts, that means somebody came and said, no, I want to try again at a higher court. Who is this group of people who's so mad at Becky? Like, who is behind this that won't take no for an answer?
I would love to tell you about the architects of these attacks against trans young people. You have the Alliance Defending Freedom that has come in and written these bills that are copycat across every state in this country, banning transgender girls from participation in sports, banning our healthcare access, doing all of these things to prevent young people from just being able to stay alive and be themselves. And so, they are the ones who were the architects of these laws in the first place. And then they've come in and defended these laws in court as well. And so we had, the Fourth Circuit, which is the lower court under the Supreme Court, rule in Becky's favor, allowing her to play on the team on cross country and track over the last few years. And then you have the Alliance Defending Freedom coming in and asking for the Supreme Court to weigh in on a case where there's one girl who's participating, that's the only issue. And, this is a record that's incomplete. We're at the lower court for a reason, to test the facts. And, one of the big open questions in this case, like still at the Supreme Court, is whether girls like Becky actually have any advantage, right? So HB 3293 excludes the consideration of the one actual factor that contributes to athletic performance, which is levels of circulating testosterone. And girls like Becky, who have never experienced their endogenous puberty, and who have gone through a typical hormonal female puberty, do not have the advantages that West Virginia is trying to control for here. Yet you have the Alliance Defending Freedom raising this to the Supreme Court, and you have a Supreme Court that agreed to take the case. So both things are true, right? Like they requested that the Supreme Court get involved here. We know why. This has never been about sports. This is about using sports as a springboard to greenlight discrimination against us in all of these other contexts. I think that's clear based on the fact that, you hear these same stories about trans athletes like Leah Thomas and others who gave up sports years ago. Why are we hearing those same stories being pushed? It's because they want to use that example of one athlete doing well in sports to upend our protections in all of these other contexts. And that's been very clear that that's the goal of the Alliance Defending Freedom. They've even said they hope that sports is the card to make everything else crumble.
That's crazy. And something interesting about that to me is I feel like actually it was a track runner in India who helped me understand how like not just gender, but sex is a spectrum, because they were disqualifying her from her right to run professionally because they said she had too much testosterone. So the irony here, of course, and like the way that their arguments make no sense when you take into consideration how people actually are in the real world is here's a cis woman who was told you can't run because you have too much testosterone. Here's a trans girl who doesn't have as much testosterone. And like, that's the problem. Like, you know what I mean? So what is your it's just a made up thing you guys are looking at.
There's so much like variety in athletic skill level in sport and height. I remember like, look at me. I wasn't going to be good at any sport and I accepted that. And that was what I was given. But there's so many different heights. And
yeah, should we say Luol Deng or like all the tall basketball players can't play because they're too tall? It's not fair to the rest of us.
I mean, that's the thing is like so many exceptional athletes have excelled because of biological advantage. Michael Phelps is shaped like a freak. And that's just how he was born, but that's how he's able to be.
Or that hot dog eater. He had a distended stomach that allowed him to eat a lot more hot dogs and he could unlock his jaw like a snake. We didn't say, no, you can't eat hot dogs. We celebrated.
Does he need representation? Is he being like...
No, he was actually, we loved him. Yeah. Who was the main hot dog guy before Joey Chestnut? It was that guy.
Oh, yeah. I forgot his name, but he lives on forever in our hearts.
Yeah, and like that's the thing here. There's so much like variance in sport, and sport is inherently unequal. There's nothing unequal about Becky participating against other girls. I think that's the biggest misconception. They're like, oh, she finished 53rd out of 56. Well, whoever finished 54th and 55th was really harmed by her participating. Like, that's just not the reality here. She doesn't have those advantages. She trains really hard. Like, is everyone just discounting the fact that this girl is spending every weekend practicing shot put and discus, which she wasn't very good at in 6th grade when she was still trans? Like nothing, like she's continuing to be trans. And the only thing that's changing is the level of like activity around the sport that she's newly picked up and that she loves doing with her friends. And so that's really what's at issue here. You know, they've made it impossible for trans girls or women to ever show that they should be allowed to participate. And the same thing was true for Black people who were excluded from sport for a long time based on, you know, alleged like concerns about their physiology. Like this is not new, right? Like attacks on our bodily autonomy are not new. This is about controlling what a man, what a woman, what a family can and should look like, and destabilizing our ability to like make that decision for ourselves. That has been very clear from the start of this case when you think about like the scope of the problem here. I remember the district court's ruling even said that this law is a solution in search of a problem. That just spoke volumes to me.
A lot of this attack on trans people that is being largely funneled through an attack on trans athletes is attacking the made-up problem of safety. That's constantly what they say. That's Riley Gaines's favorite little talking point. They're attacking this concept of safety, like while completely ignoring the actual danger to like children's safety, which are like very present in like adult men.
What do you think about like the overbreadth of these laws? Like Idaho's law is K through 12. Talking about safety in kindergarten when usually, you know, pre-puberty, all kids play together. Like these laws actually don't do what they say they do. They are so overbroad. They sweep in chess and other sports where fairness and safety look very different than football or soccer, you know? And that's not to say that this needs to be some individualized, like case-by-case analysis in a way that's so overly burdensome. West Virginia had a policy in place prior to HB 3293. What that said was a school could make the determination of whether a young person could participate based on the sport, based on any alleged fairness or safety concerns. And that policy was never at issue. I mean, frankly, I don't even know if it was utilized much, but you know, they had something that worked and they just did a complete turnaround and enacted a sweeping ban of all trans girls. And so I think it's important to note that departure, that people are like, well, this is unworkable. How are we going to make like a Becky specific policy? That already existed and it exists across the country and it works. And so what's new is this new exclusionary attempt to just relegate trans kids as second grade citizens, you know, like it just, the goal is to push us out of public life. Unfortunately for them, Becky and I were front and center at the Supreme Court, visible to every single justice, telling them, we exist, we're here, and you're going to have to do something about it.
Speaking of safety and the idea that this is all to keep girls and women safe, I know that one of the things that they have suggested is gender testing, which seems to me like a way to put children actually at more risk. Can you speak to what that would be and who's advocating for that and what you think the implications could be?
Yeah, Idaho, Washington, many states are advocating for this really invasive form of testing to confirm or verify whether some young person is a girl or not. And we're already seeing the consequences of that play out. There was a basketball player in Utah who was accused by a Republican official of being transgender, and she was subject to all of this invasive scrutiny. And she's not, she's cis, but just because she had a bigger build, this, you know, official called her out, you know, doxed her on social media. And that's the kind of result that will continue to flow from these kinds of really invasive exams, because it invites anyone to question, you know, what our gender is based on short hair.
Transvestigating is like the scariest. Like, it's like if you give those people the right to enact whenever they want, it is going to be like scary, violating mayhem.
Another question I have is, aside from how absolutely evil it would be for that to be a policy, I think New Mexico was another state that was trying to include a gender investigation bill of some kind. Is that even real? Like, is it even possible other than like the loose opinions of kind of an invasive search? Because we do have intersex people. We do like, there are variations on gender. How could they even define what it would mean to gender test someone and have them pass?
And I think the point here to highlight is I don't think they even know. I think, you know, these very vague and non-scientific definitions of sex that, for example, don't work for most intersex folks, I think shows how little they know and how keen they are on legislating on how little they know. You know, I think that's a real problem because, you know, Florida was contemplating a policy that would track young people's menstrual cycles and that they would have to report that, and that would be a way to confirm that they're actually a girl. Who wants to report their period to, you know, any adult?
Also, I'm sorry, do we not starve female athletes? What period?
Yeah, I mean, seriously, like, I don't know what parent would be okay with their, 11-year-old girl subject to pelvic examinations and menstrual reporting, especially, this is just the context of like our rights as trans and non-binary and intersex people, but like the women's rights movement more broadly and threats to bodily autonomy and reproductive control. What's going to happen is that less women are going to participate in sports. That is going to be the result of that. It's not even less transgender women who are going to participate. It's less women because how much abuse already exists in women's sports. Mm-hmm. There is so much. And I am completely understanding if women don't want to put themselves through more of that just to succumb to this weird obsession with, our genitals and our chromosomes. And so I totally agree that there are just a lot of consequences and unintended, I imagine, that will flow from this because of how little, thought went into the decision-making before enacting these types of really discriminatory and harmful policies.
Can I ask you, so you guys just went to the Supreme Court. How was it?
Yeah. I would love to tell you about it, like from the start of the day.
I would honestly love it. Like, I'm both obviously interested in the case itself, but what a storied institution. No?
Yeah. What was it like to stand in a room with people that you wish you could punch in their damn face?
Don't say that about them. You don't know what they want violently. That's like kind of a lot to say about a lawyer, Ashley. Okay.
Well, I appreciate that. That's your perspective. I'm happy to fill in some of the gaps as to what it's like to be in that room, especially with a 15-year-old by my side. Like, right. I've represented a lot of clients.
Can I say again, the cutest name anyone's ever heard?
Becky Pepper-Jackson.
We haven't really dwelled on it. I couldn't believe it.
I do want to tell you that some experts in our class repeatedly called her P.B.J. instead of B.P.J. And I was like, wrong sandwich. No, this is our client, B.P.J., cutest name ever. She's never been at the Supreme Court, obviously, even for a tour, like to see the gift shop or whatever. She's only been in D.C. a few times. And so this was really momentous. We woke up in the morning in our hotel and we came down for breakfast in the lobby. Her face was on every screen in our hotel lobby where we had breakfast. And I just think that's so overwhelming for anyone, let alone a 15-year-old. So when we're in the car to the Supreme Court and we get to the court, we get through security, they sort of immediately seat us at around 9:30 a.m. And, she's looking up at the ceiling. First thing she says is, the architecture is stunning. And I'm like, wow, you're so smart. Like, I don't think I would have thought or used those words when I was 15. Who knows? But she was really taken aback by just how beautiful the courtroom was and how like intimate and honestly like powerful it felt to be sitting there. We did not anticipate, because the seating is kind of random, we didn't anticipate being front and center, like dead in the center of all of these justices, to the point where I noticed Justice Sotomayor looking at Becky directly in the eyes. And I'm like, wow, this is so important. Like, this is our day in court, regardless of the rhetoric around these cases, regardless of how this particular composition of the court might view trans issues. They cannot refute the fact that she exists, I exist as her attorney right next to her, and we're waiting to see, how they're going to speak about our lives. I think one of the things that she picked up on was that it was a really weird experience to be talked about by these justices in the courtroom, and also like extremely empowering to be talked about because, I was also counsel in Scrimeti, which is the case that was contemplating Tennessee's categorical ban of gender-affirming medical care for minors. Obviously, that case didn't go our way. We lost. And the Supreme Court says that in the discrete context of medical care and medical use, that kind of law that Tennessee enacted is fine. So we were going in with that pit in our stomach from Scrimeti into this courtroom. And I honestly believe that we saw a little bit of a different court. This court, some of the justices used the terminology transgender and cisgender. They were very engaged with the issues. And I thought, even Justice Kavanaugh said, there's harm on both sides here, during the argument. That to me was extremely powerful, regardless of how they rule in Becky's specific case. The fact that they realize that trans people are under attack right now.
I feel like with this administration, sometimes for them to acknowledge that a problem exists is in itself a step forward.
It's a step forward. And, I've had to reshape like what a win means to me. But that piece, it is a huge win to me. Like, obviously, the last few years have not been good for trans people. You have, these states passing these awful laws. You have the entire federal government against us and rolling back our protections. And you have a president who signed an executive order at the start of the year that declared that America only has two sexes and that we as trans people don't exist.
I see you for sure. I'm like, can I say? I can absolutely confirm.
Well, then who's in the chair right now?
No, exactly. And so this is situated in the context of all of that. It's situated in the context of Skrmetti, with that case just recently being decided, and this case, getting granted cert just a week later on July 3rd on my birthday. Great birthday present for me last year that these cases were making their way up there. But I just want to, give credit where credit is due, that I do feel like there's been some education, and whether that's because of sort of the public scrutiny and focus on trans folks and our rights, or whether, having a second case there really did do some educating of the court, because our client didn't have to hear herself be misgendered in the court by the justices. I think that was a big sticking point for her, because it's a dignitary point. Regardless of what you think about sports, our hope is that sports isn't utilized to greenlight this broader attack against trans people in other contexts of our lives where we already face discrimination, like employment or identity documents or our ability to use restrooms. I think it's the focus, the media narrative, it's been about sports, but as we just talked about, the sports issue is actually so small. There are like such a small number of athletes who even want to participate. This is really about making sure that trans people know that they still have rights under the Constitution and under Title IX, and that we are going to continue vigorously defending that in all contexts.
I just have one more question about a day at the Supreme Court. Are there several cases being heard that day, or is it this is the day that your case is being heard and you guys are the only ones there?
Sometimes there's multiple. So Tuesday, there were 2 cases that were heard. It's really infrequent that there are 2 completely different cases that are heard. Sometimes the Supreme Court grants cert on 2 similar issues, and then those cases are heard on the same day. But it's typically 1 case a day that's heard, because it's a long day. I mean, the justices were definitely tired. We were in
so
there.
Old, right?
Yeah.
You said that.
I mean, are there not facts in this world? I saw old, I said old.
There's some old ones and there's some sprightly young ones, and so we have a nice blend of justices. But anyone sitting there from 10 to 2-ish, there's no break where you can leave the courtroom. So we were there. There's no water allowed.
I was going to say no food
Can't
in
use
the courtroom, right?
Nope. If you lose the restroom, you lose your seat. Becky and I were like, absolutely not. We're staying front and center. And, we just have a notebook that cannot have like any writing on it, like before it gets into the courtroom, and a pen, and that's it. And no phones. You check everything else away. And it's really another thing Becky noticed is that it's an inaccessible space to most people. Mm-hmm. So to gain entry into this space where our livelihood is both debated and decided, I think is just really powerful for a 15-year-old to take in and to really like show up for, because I commend her for showing up.
I mean, what an impressive 15-year-old to sit
Truly.
there for hours, no phone.
No phone.
Show me another.
I did see some of her doodles.
She was bored.
Yeah, I saw her notes. She asked me to write down the names of all the justices in the order that they're sitting.
Oh, smart.
And then she had like a little line coming down from each, and then words to describe them that I'll keep to myself for now.
Lawyer confidentiality,
attorney-client privilege. Yes. Yeah.
So how did it go?
I would say that given the genuine engagement by the justices on our issue, I think even the justices, especially Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Gorsuch, were very nervous about some of the arguments that West Virginia and Idaho were making on Tuesday with respect to how broad of a ruling that they want in this case. If they could have it their way, they would write transgender people out of existence and make sure that we had no protections under any constitutional or federal statutory provision. And both Amy Coney Barrett and Gorsuch, raised concerns about, sex separation in sports could lead to sex separation in classrooms, to chess. It seemed like they did not want to sign on to that broader agenda. Again, we can never be sure of, how the justices are going to come down on these issues. But I just want to convey that, I think sports is a hotly contested, like, sort of sliver of like what's going on here. And I think our goal is that we see this as a success if, no matter what happens in sports, the justices do everything in their power to preserve other precedent. For example, Bostock, the case that was decided in 2020 that prevents discrimination in the employment context. You can't get fired for being gay or trans. It seemed like the justices were willing to sort of stand by that precedent. And so that was another green flag for me. Again, I think it's hard in the context of sports. We know how the public rhetoric is on these issues. And with respect to these cases not being fully complete in terms of a record, our main goal was to ask the court to send this back down to the lower courts so that we can do more of the evidentiary gathering of whether girls like Becky have any advantage over other cisgender girls. And, the records that we do have show that she doesn't. And so if she doesn't, and if that fact is taken as true, there is no reason to exclude Becky. The justification given is to prevent athletic advantage in female sports. You have Becky. She has no athletic advantage. Becky should be allowed to participate.
Is it hard for Becky to be like her number one piece of evidence? She's like, I'm not even fast.
Yeah, exactly.
I swear to God, I have no talent.
It's very hard for her to understand because, these people on the other side, they push this idea that Becky isn't precluded from sports. She could just play on the boys' team.
I'm not even varsity.
Yeah, this is humiliating for her. It would completely erase who she is. It's inconsistent with her medical treatment to just think she can go and play on the boys' team. It's almost akin to making her wear a necklace with a scarlet T on her saying, I'm trans and I'm the only girl out of all of my friends who's not allowed to play on the girls' team.
Especially because track and cross country, when you're not good at them, are kind of just to hang out and go for a walk with your friends. And sometimes you run when your coach yells at you. I was bad at track. We were just hanging out.
Yeah. And, because she got, marginally better at shot put and discus, that's not a reason to throw her off the team.
No, that's a proof of practicing.
Yeah. And one of the important points that our legal counsel made, Josh Block, who was advocating on Tuesday in front of the justices, was that, there could be a better version of this West Virginia law that likely wouldn't be as unconstitutional and wouldn't violate Becky's rights. But this law doesn't, for example, a law that potentially said they can join practices and like you said, half of track and cross country is just hanging out with your friends on the field, going to practice. Even while you're at meets, it's sitting around for hours.
Hours.
It's mostly just hanging out and eating Sour Patch Kids.
This law wouldn't even let Becky eat Sour Patch Kids with her friends. That is what we wanted to show the court, that this is so overbroad. We didn't want to say that, hey, the legislature was completely out of order to do something about, trans girls participating, or that the legislature wasn't, justified to have concerns about fairness and safety. But after looking and carefully examining those justifications, if you look at Becky and see that she doesn't meet any of what they are concerned about, she should be allowed to participate. And her team, they understand that this could be her last season. Becky understands that this could be her last season of track. She just wants to soak in every minute of it. And I think what she wanted to tell the court, and I think what we achieved in telling the court, is that this is not about Becky trying to get a one-up on anyone. This is not about, trying to feign who she is. This is who she is, and all she wants to do is have fun with her friends. And she plans to do that this season, even if it's her final.
I really want her to have that. It is so crazy because unfortunately, this is not going to come across well, but it is the truth. I think most of female sports is participating. There is not a lot of funding for women's sports. There is not a lot of fanfare and accolades to be gained generally, unless you are the tippy top. And so for these girls to be discriminated against when it is mostly hanging out is really devastating.
It's also Title IX, the purpose of it was to increase opportunities for girls, not be, taking them away. And so the idea that Title IX wouldn't protect Becky as well is really, outrageous to me, because, all students deserve protections, but especially trans students who, could you imagine being a young person right now? It's seeing what the federal government is doing, watching the media, the rhetoric around these issues, demonizing their lives, preventing them from accessing healthcare. Most trans kids are traveling out of state to even access care because it's banned in half the country. And so I just wish that people would take a step back, zoom out a little bit and think about this as this is a young person who just wants to do the thing that she loves. And, everyone should have that opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's so overwhelming for her to see her face on the news so much, but it is so crucial to have girls like Becky who are willing to be the face of a case like this, because there's so much rhetoric and so much demonization of trans people. But when you look and see who are the people that are being discriminated against, and you're like, just that girl?
A girl named Becky.
Becky Pepper-Jackson is the monster.
I think they have some harrowing image of who this, obscure hypothetical trans woman who's going to beat everyone actually is. And again, goes back to why they have no examples of this actually happening, this actually presenting a problem. And then you have Becky Pepper-Jackson, who, just is so bravely telling her story to this whole world as a 15-year-old. Instead of being in class on Tuesday, she was at the Supreme Court defending her rights. That is so much to ask of any young person, but especially trans people right now. We are under so much duress, and to ask her to be so brave and bold and to give her story out so freely to other people. I just want to commend her. And all we've heard is that, she's a hero to so many people. I want to say, so when we left the courtroom, there was a huge rally outside, and both sides' rallies are like catty corner to each other. They're like an inch apart, separated by a very thin railing. There was a very gray, dark side, and then there was a side with a DJ playing Chapel Roan and a bunch of people with all of these signs. And they were, as soon as we came out of the courtroom, we walked down the steps, they were chanting, "Becky, Becky." And her mom turns around to me and starts bawling. And I was like, "Are you okay?" And she goes, "When Becky steps out on the field in West Virginia, she's never heard one person chant for her like this. Like it's silent." And so for her to come out of the Supreme Court and hear this chant, and these people have been there since 10 a.m. They stayed to see her and to give her that validation and that affirmation and that love. That moment, I think, tied the whole case up in a nice bow for her. And no matter how things go in June, she feels so proud of what she's been able to accomplish in terms of more of an inspiration for the other young trans people who similarly may not get a single applause or a single high five after they participate or after they do anything that they love. And so at the very least, I'm just so thankful to everyone who showed up on Tuesday to give her that.
I would love to ask you, we asked our audience if they have any questions for you specifically. And the one that came up the most by far was, what can people do who are not going to the Supreme Court necessarily as a lawyer to help trans people right now? Like, what is the best thing you can do?
Yeah, this is a really difficult time. I just want to express, how despairing it's been to be trans, to be a parent of trans young people. I've talked to so many parents this year, and I think the one thing that we absolutely need to be doing is investing in our creative projects. I mean, exactly like this, we need to be storytelling. We need to be telling Becky's story and other young people's story. But more importantly, we need to be giving young people themselves a platform to tell us who they are and what their needs are. I think, there are so many, pieces of misinformation in this media about our healthcare, about, our restroom access, and about what kind of threat or not threat we are. Like, there's so much of a debate over our existence. And I just would encourage adults to create safe spaces that don't legitimize that debate, that don't give that debate any airtime, because we are here. Young people like Becky know who they are. Her parents who support her and love her know who she is. And I just want people to trust that and to keep making sure that, these folks who don't have an ounce of medical expertise, who are sitting in our legislatures, don't so easily rip those stability, inducing things away from us, like our healthcare. And I think a part of that is writing to your local representatives and telling them how important it is to stand up and be vocal for trans people right now. Because like I said, we have the federal government entirely against us, and we have a president who has basically, run his campaign on our bodies. And the only thing I can say is that, what I'm seeing lately in Virginia and in Miami and other places, running on an anti-trans campaign isn't getting you reelected this year. I think a lot of people can show up with their vote and vote for representatives who don't want to leave trans people behind. In our city itself, we have Zoran, who has committed to ensuring that young people have access to care and that schools don't discriminate against trans young people. We need more of that. And so I would just encourage you to use your vote, to use your voice to elevate stories of trans folks, and honestly, just check in on us. I think it goes a lot further than you would think to just reach out to a trans young person or a trans adult in your life and remind them that they are not alone, because they very much aren't. I am with them, the ACLU is with them, and you all are with them too.
Yeah, we're with them.
And okay, before this podcast, you said, I wish I could do a podcast about Bravo, but unfortunately, unlike a lot of us, you've been moved to do good on the planet by being a lawyer, which kind of sucks for you, but we're grateful for everybody else. But I would love to give you the opportunity right now on this podcast. Can you please rank your favorite Bravo celebrities? First, top 3 by your favorite housewives, and then top 3 by the most supportive of the LGBTQ plus community?
Well, that's easy because they're one and the same.
Amazing.
I have to say, Lisa Rinna from the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills.
Oh my God,
she's helpful.
Such a trans ally. Also, just the funniest person. I'm watching her on Traders now, and she's continuing to just keep giving me material that, prevents the despair from taking over. I have to say, Bronwyn Newport from the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Soon, whoa, yes. I wish I could speak with Bronwyn because she showed up to the rally at Scrimeti last year in front of the Supreme Court, and she made this statement that was like, housewives know better than anyone that gender affirming care is vital. And that is just like such a brilliant point to make. We all access gender affirming care. Matt Gaetz definitely accesses gender affirming care. It's not just limited to trans people. And so Bronwyn is my number 2. And then I have to give credit where credit is due. I think Heather Gay has really come out.
In the name.
Also, yes. Yeah. Besides being an ally, just through her last name, she's really come out. And I think her documentary, Surviving Mormonism, really speaks to some of the issues that the LGBTQ community, not just trans people, undergo when it comes to, connecting with their faith. And I think she has a really important perspective with, the LGBTQ community, who's a community of faith. And so I really want her to keep using her platform in that way and speak out directly in support of trans people. But those 3 are my superstars: Beverly Hills, Salt Lake City. You all have kept me, sustained through this grueling litigation year. So thank you, Housewives.
Thank you so much. I mean, thank you so much for all the work that you do and for coming and talking to us about it. And
thank you. I just loved having this conversation, and thank you for making this a priority on your platform.
Of course. And so this case will be announced, the results in June.
In June.
What?
Okay. Perfect.
What are they doing?
Gift. It's
so we will be updating you guys as things evolve. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for doing what you do.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you all.
Support the ACLU.
Support the ACLU.
Get yourself a sweatshirt.
Support trans people and support our immigrant neighbors in this moment. Yes.